Welcome to FOSI Radio. We are broadcasting from the central campus of Christ University, Bengaluru. FOSI Radio is brought to you by the Department of Media Studies, Christ University. For all those who are looking for a platform that focuses on communities, commons, climate, and communication, this is the place to be. What's more, this station is run by a diverse community of students and dedicated faculty members. Tune in to experience hard hitting interviews, fact checks and myth busting, on ground stories, campus news, and more.
Today, we pay tribute to Dr. Madhav Gadgil, one of India's most respected and influential ecologists and a leading advocate of environmental conservation. He passed away on 7 January 2026 after a brief illness in Pune. Dr. Gadgil is close to our hearts for a very special reason. When we started FOSI Radio in June 2025 on the occasion of World Environment Day, it was with a long interview with Dr. Gadgil, which not just inspired us and our audience, but also helped us to frame ourselves within the 4 Cs: climate, communities, commons, and communication. And we know there are thousands like us who were shaped and impacted because of Dr. Gadgil's work.
I am a scientist, and for me, real life facts are what are important. And because of course, I am by training basically an ecologist, but also I did a thesis in using computer modeling, so I know a lot about that field. But because my father was an economist and my neighbor Iravati Karve was a distinguished sociologist, and both of them had both love for nature and sympathy for people, I have acquired all that.
Dr. Madhav Gadgil is an Indian ecologist who founded the Center for Ecological Studies at IISc Bangalore. He headed the Western Ghats Ecological Expert Panel of 2010 and was instrumental in establishing India's first biosphere reserve, the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. He was awarded the Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan for his relentless conservation work. In 2024, Madhav Gadgil was chosen as the UN Champion of the Earth.
Dr. Gadgil's work influenced environmental thinking and practice in India in ways that extended well beyond academic research. Through the People's Biodiversity Registers, local communities began formally documenting plants, animals, landscapes, and traditional ecological practices. This helped establish community knowledge as legitimate ecological data. Over time, it also informed how biodiversity documentation and governance was structured under India's biological diversity framework.
His long-standing argument against exclusionary conservation models strengthened the idea that conservation is more effective when local communities are involved. Over time, this thinking influenced policy discussions around participatory and community-based approaches to forest and resource management rather than purely top-down control. He had told us a story about one such discovery.
Let me tell you some very positive experiences, and these are with the Forest Rights Act. And the Forest Rights Act, which came into force in 2008, not allowed to be implemented throughout the country because giving rights to local people and natural resources is anathema. So although the act was passed and it is supposed to be implemented, over much of the country it is not. But there are exceptions. So in Gadchiroli district of Maharashtra, fortunately, Kiran Kulkarni, she is a lady who was the deputy collector who was in charge of implementing the Forest Rights Act, and she acted very honestly and gave various types of forest rights, but the important one is community forest resource. So this is area without any limit, but where there is clear evidence of traditional use of that terrain by local community. There were a number of very bright young boys and girls who had sometimes very poor formal education, but they have tremendous knowledge of the local environment. When we did field work, they were my teachers. Now with the modern technology, it is possible for them to be continued to interact and continue to be educated and get information which would earlier not be available, which is the information communication technology tools. And after 2015-16, in the rural areas in India, at least some people have the smartphones. In Gadchiroli, I mean, some villages which are away from the main roads and affected by Naxalites, in fact, in the grip of Naxalites, nevertheless, the boys who were part of our course have their smartphones and they are able to communicate. So after the course was over, Sadhuram Badavi, he was amongst the very highly knowledgeable boys, knowledgeable in the local plants and animals. We were part of this WhatsApp group and they were uploading images of various plants, animals and chatting with each other. Where is this? And they were initially sharing only the Gondi names or Marathi names. But then suddenly this Sadhuram, he came up with the scientific name. In his village was this ground orchid, Geonorum taxiflorum, I think it was. And he came up with this name. So I asked him. He said, yes, I picked it up through using this. We had taught them to use these Google apps primarily to use Google Earth information to identify the vegetation in their community forest resources and so on. So we had made them familiar in the teaching course and the fact that there are these apps. But then he had gone further, explored other apps he had located. So there was this Geonorum taxiflorum amongst other things. Now the botany teachers in Gadchiroli College had become Sadhuram's students. Sadhuram is 10th standard failed. And they were his students because they did not know most of the plants. And Sadhuram was with these apps telling them even the scientific names of these plants. So he told him about this ground orchid. Then they looked up the literature and found that this was a special occurrence, that it was not a plant recorded from this part of the country at all. So they published a scientific paper with Sadhuram as one of the co-authors. So 10th standard failed boy is an author of a scientific publication. And that is what science asks for.
As chair of the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel, Gadgil led a comprehensive scientific assessment of the region and proposed limits on environmentally damaging activities in ecologically sensitive zones. Although the recommendations were not fully implemented, the report permanently shifted public and policy discourse by bringing concepts like ecological limits and cumulative environmental risk into mainstream debate.
Rescue efforts are underway in Kerala after the state's worst flooding in over a century. More than 150,000 people have been left homeless, and the displaced are being sent to emergency shelters across the state.
After the Kerala floods, which displaced over more than 150,000 people, several news reports and commentaries referred back to the Western Ghats report, noting that concerns around unregulated development and ecological fragility in the region had been documented years earlier.
As a teacher and mentor, he trained and influenced multiple generations of ecologists and environmental researchers. Many of them went on to work in universities, research institutions, civil society organizations, and policy spaces. His influence extended beyond his own writing and reports. His autobiography, published in 2023, details his journey, which will undoubtedly inspire generations to come. We have Professor Prachi Pinglay with us today to talk about Dr. Gadgil's autobiography, A Walk Up the Hill.
Last year in January, we went to Pune to meet Dr. Madhav Gadgil. We wanted to do an interview with him for our podcast, 4C Radio, and for a documentary. Before going to meet him, naturally I had to do some research, not just about what he has written in the past, but his book, his autobiography called A Walk Up the Hill. Living with People and Nature, that had been released in 2023. The book really gives a terrific insight into the legend actually. The book talks about his childhood, the book talks about his career, and the book talks about what he felt in terms of conservation, people's rights, and what we all need to do as people. So what happened was, in his early childhood, and he writes about it very beautifully, when he had a doubt about a particular bird shedding feathers at a particular time, he wrote to none other than Dr. Salim Ali, who's called the Birdman of India. So that's how his interest in research and curiosity in finding about nature started. Later he talks about how he went with researcher Iravati Karve to Kodagu, or Coorg as we know it, to conduct field work. So he had been initiated into thorough research, and his curiosity led him to do courageous work for all his life. The book also details his long, illustrious academic career and how he used that and how he applied that to set up centers, to do field work. He also used the research and what he learned from the field to not just document what had been happening with evidence, he talks about empirical evidence, but also to use that evidence to make policy recommendations that have far-reaching impact on India and, to be honest, the world. We live in times of climate change, we live in times of extreme inequality, we live in times of less advantaged people and vulnerable people being at the receiving end of rampant development that we are forcing on our planet at the moment. He took a stand for all of that, not just in his career, but he talks about it in his book in great detail. The book is dedicated to Bismarck, and the story of Bismarck is, you will be able to hear that story on our podcast that was released 6 months ago on Environment Day. But basically the book is dedicated to this local who paid a heavy price. He was found dead when he tried to fight for rights of his community and resist forced development. Madhav Gadgil, being a scientist or being an accomplished academician, never resisted, never stayed away from people. He was always with people, and I think that really makes it very, very special, and that's exactly what the autobiography also is all about. The sense that you get when you read his autobiography is that how special it is, what kind of a legacy it is to have an extremely rare scientist who not just ventured into research with an open mind, terrific rigor, and was courageous enough, was bold enough to put all his findings on paper and tell things as they were. Meeting Dr. Madhav Gadgil only sort of reinforced everything that I felt about him and his work while reading the book. My suggestion is that all of us should reread if we have already read his book, and if you haven't read his book, please go find a copy and read the book to understand what an extraordinary life he lived and what an extraordinary contribution he has made to the conservation efforts of our country.
As we close this episode today, we are reminded that Dr. Gadgil's work was never about grand gestures or easy answers. It was about paying attention to our ecosystems, our communities, and to the long-term consequences of our own actions. Dr. Madhav Gadgil is no longer with us, but his questions still remain relevant. How do we live responsibly in this land? Who gets to decide the future of our forests, rivers, and mountains? And are we willing to listen to our nature and to ourselves?
This episode was our way of acknowledging Dr. Madhav Gadgil, who changed the course of environmental thought in India through rigorous and courageous research that was guided by principles of fairness and justice.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. As always, stay curious and tune in for more. This episode was hosted by Diya and Shinjini Chaturvedi and edited by Guru Aditya, illustrated by Vernika Singh.
Please write to us and follow us on X and Instagram.